A bombshell admission in court. The woman you see here in this wedding picture, the wife, admitted to conspiring with her mom and brother to kill her husband by luring him to Utah. For as much as she and her family thought they were covering their tracks, they didn't think of everything. Their big mistake that blew this case wide open. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Before we get back to this episode of On the Case, I want to take a moment and pause and bring you a Law&Crime legal alert because children are being diagnosed with serious conditions like type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and research is potentially linking ultra-processed foods to these outcomes. Our partners at Morgan & Morgan are stepping in to fight to hold food companies accountable. They have decades of experience fighting large corporations, and they're ready to stand up for families who deserve justice. So if your child under 21 has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, go to www.forthepeople.com/food. You can also scan this QR code on your screen or click the link below. The story that we're talking about today took a dramatic turn in just the last week in a way a lot of people weren't expecting. The story revolves around the woman you see here. Her name is Kathryn Restelli, and how she conspired with two other people to kill her husband in 2024. And not just any two other people, her mom and her brother. They were all allegedly in on this. Now, before I get to that big twist that happened in court, let's go back to where all of this started. Up until June of last year, Kathryn Restelli lived with her husband, Matt, and their three kids in California. But then on June 20th, 2024, Kathryn left with their three children unannounced and moved in with her mom in American Fork, Utah, which is south of Salt Lake City. Now, here's a picture of Kathryn's mom. She is a key player in this story, Tracy Grist. And she allegedly thought that her daughter's marriage was in such peril that she allegedly came up with a wild plan. According to court records, Kathryn's mom implied that she could arrange to get Matthew hurt or killed to get her daughter out of that marriage. When Kathryn learned Matthew wanted to drive from California to Utah to get her and their three kids and then bring them back to the West Coast, that's when court records say that Kathryn decided it was time to go through with her mom's alleged plan. Kathryn came up with the idea of making her estranged husband believe that she wanted to get the family back together. Now, at first, when Matthew heard that, he booked a car for Kathryn to drive back to California with the kids. He even sent her money. But Kathryn made sure those plans fell through. Here's a recording played in court of their conversation about that.
Hey, what's going on?
Hey, I'm at a loss right now, Matt.
Okay, just chill out.
They won't rent me the car.
Okay, we'll have your mom rent it.
She doesn't have money on her credit card. I can't do it with my debit card because I have an out-of-state license.
So after those plans fell through, Matthew decides that he is going to drive to Utah to bring his family back to California because he's under the impression that Kathryn wants to get back together. But once he decides to do that, Kathryn decides with her family, allegedly, that it was time to go through with the plan to kill Matthew to get her out of that marriage forever. Now, the plan that Tracy allegedly came up with was that Kathryn's brother, Kevin Ellis, who you see here in video in court, would shoot and kill Matthew once he arrived at their house. Not only did they allegedly want to kill Matthew, they also allegedly came up with a plan to cover it up. After killing Matthew, the family plan was to allegedly put a knife in his hand to make it seem like Kevin had to use his gun in self-defense. This is an incredibly key part to this story. It's also important to note that Kathryn's role in all of this wasn't just knowing of the plan, but she was an active participant. On July 12th, 2024, Matthew made the trip to Utah from California, and Kathryn knew where he was the entire time because she had put an AirTag in his truck before she left California with the kids. Court records also say that Kathryn made phone calls with Matthew to keep him calm during the drive. She told Matthew to come into the house through the front door, which was unlocked. Part of the plan was for Matthew to not knock or ring the doorbell. Kathryn was upstairs in the house with her kids when Kevin shot and killed Matthew. Court records also say that Kathryn overheard Kevin telling their mom that she needed to be careful because Matthew may still be moving after he was shot. Tracy, the mom, is the one who called 911, and it's at this point that Kathryn, Tracy, and Kevin put the next part of their plan allegedly into motion, and that is the cover-up. Kevin reportedly put a knife in Matthew's hand to help with their story that Matthew was the aggressor and he had to act in self-defense. But this is the big problem that they made. The knife was put in Matthew's right hand. Matthew Restelli was left-handed, so it would be odd for an attacker to carry a knife in their non-dominant hand. Kathryn, Tracy, and Kevin were all arrested and charged with luring Matthew to Utah to kill him because of Kathryn's marital issues. Here's video of Kevin in court. He's set to go on trial in January 2026. And here's video of Tracy in court. She is set to go on trial in the beginning of 2026 as well. As for Kathryn, let's get to what happened in court this week. Here's the big twist. She accepted a plea deal, admitting to her role in Matthew's death. Under the agreement, Kathryn is pleading guilty to a count of second-degree murder, second-degree conspiracy to commit murder, and first-degree discharging a firearm related to domestic violence. It could put her in prison for the rest of her life. She will learn her sentence on September 9th. Join us now to talk about this is retired police commander and the host of Profiling Evil, Mike King. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. I know that you followed this story out where you live in Utah. Let's get to the big kind of bombshell twist in all of this. The knife goes into the wrong hands, and that seemed to be a major red flag for law enforcement. What do you make, before we get into the plea deals and all of that, that being kind of the twist that appears to have really blown up this plan that this family had?
Boy, I'm with you, Chris. And I think that's really an interesting thing that probably wasn't an aha moment at the crime scene, because obviously these police officers wouldn't know whether Restelli is left-handed or right-handed. But the thing that is so interesting is the amount of staging that we're now learning went in this case. And the fact that we see what probably was part of this whole fantasy process that now we know Kathryn Restelli has pled guilty to. We still have to, by all rights, that allegedly mom and brother are involved in this murder, and we see that they are waiting trial. But think about the amount of fantasy that went into planning this thing, to think about, how am I going to stage not only the crime scene, I'm going to, by the way, take some effort or put some effort into play to cover the couch, to move toys, to do other things to kind of establish a crime scene that can stay somewhat pristine and yet really get across the point that this guy broke into our house and we're defending our domain. But then at the conclusion of that, to place the knife in his right hand, and that became incredibly critical.
Very critical. And then they, I'm sure along the way there was that aha moment of, wait a second, he was left-handed, so why would he come at someone in that moment? If this actually happened, as they say, the way it did, why would you do it in your offhand? I think of a real sad part of this too, because Matthew Restelli was under the impression, and this was a marriage that was toxic apparently and was in duress, but he was under the impression he's driving to Utah to get his 3 kids and his wife and to get the family back together. And there's just, it seems from Kathryn's end of it, so much planning on her end to really just lure him out of California, to bring him into the house. Hey, the door's unlocked so you don't come in. You've investigated a lot of cases. When you look at this one, and though she was not the person who pulled the trigger, but she has now said that she was an active participant in this, what do you make of her role in this entire scheme, even if it was her mom, allegedly at this point, was the one who came up with it?
Yeah, I think it's really important as we look at this that we also try to remain somewhat balanced. Before we talk about that piece of it, I wanted to mention on the knife in the right hand too. I found that really interesting, that during the autopsy they discovered that there was a bullet wound in the wrist of the right hand as well, which really makes it difficult to kind of visualize him hanging onto a knife in a hand that he's been shot in. I mean, the natural response would be to get rid of that. And Again, with this idea of balance, and I always tried to keep balance when I looked at criminal cases, is this idea that he could have been ambidextrous. He could have been good with the knife in either his strong hand or maybe his weaker hand. And we see people that are like that. But as you talk about the role that Kathryn has now admitted to, this conspiratory role, we have to also think about the fact of we don't know what the sustained domestic violence was like in that family. We don't know about her personality. I don't know if she's a person who's prone to be controlling, if she was controlled in her marriage, if she's controlled by her parent, if she's controlled by a sibling. But regardless, she still took part in this thing. She still agreed to participate in this thing. She still made the phone call and said, "Yeah, I think I'd like to get back with you. Why don't you come to Utah and pick me up?" And she still either participated in ordering that knife or trying to hide that that knife was purchased, and she participated in getting that AirTag into his car somehow, or at least knowing that it was in there so that she could track it. And that's another question we don't know because this guy's dead. We don't know whether he put the AirTag in there. Heck, I keep an AirTag in my car, so I remember where I parked it at the airport, and my wife knows where the truck is all the time.
No, and I think to your point, the balance part of it, though she's admitting, and pleading guilty to a charge of second degree murder in this, you think of the circumstances that would lead, Tracy and Kevin to um, allegedly at this point move forward and come up with this plan to say, hey, this is how we can get you out of this marriage. They are both still planning as of today and recording, which is a little bit more than a week, I believe, since the plea deal went through for Kathryn, that they're going to go on trial. How
Yeah.
does a plea deal for Kathryn, who's admitting and laying out in the plea agreement all these things that we're talking about, the circumstances, the staging, the luring of Matthew Restelli to Utah, how does that now impact their cases if they're trying to fight these charges?
Holy cow! I think this isn't a shot over a bow. This is a torpedo right through the side of their ship, because now if the prosecution can get her in to testify and not be, I mean, they could compel her to come in and testify, but she could then be just a terrible witness. But it might open the door for them to then introduce that she's actually pled guilty to this murder and pled a part of this murder. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see. Number one, we didn't hear a word in that plea hearing that she has agreed to testify. I mean, we're seeing that in other criminal cases that are out right now, where somebody is saying, "Hey, I will testify against my co-conspirators." But she clearly was the first one to the candy counter, and she made a deal that is reducing her longevity in prison, maybe a little, but she's accepting responsibility for this. And she's saying, "I did it in concert with my mother and my brother," which, if they can, again, if they can get her on the stand, that is going to be a major hill to overcome.
Right. And even if Tracy's defense, Kevin's defense, they could argue, hey, we were doing this for her. If she's now admitting to all of this, that, to your point, I mean, it just really sinks the ship for the for the boat
Yeah.
reference. Um, I Even though, say if they argue that the domestic violence or whatever the marriage was, it was so dangerous that she needed to get out of it, to have a case where you have a mom, a son, and a sister, a daughter, all being on the same page allegedly to move forward with a murder. I mean, how often have you seen that in your career to have, I mean, all three, even if they were all concerned and that's their argument, we were concerned to move forward and everybody say, hey, murder's the way that we're going to have to do this.
you, you know, I know this has come out because of searches forensically that they recovered from Catherine's phone, but the Adelson case is a perfect example of another place where this happened, and it becomes like a chicken and an egg almost. Which one was first? Was she and her family hatching this plan, and the Adelsons did this, a year earlier? Or did she read that and see that and think, well, if I tweaked it this way, I could get away with it, because they almost got away with it. And of course, Mrs. Adelson is still presumed innocent, but we have to look at these cases from that perspective of did they copy someone, or were they the originator of this particular idea? But the thing that I keep going back to, Chris, and you and I have talked about it so many times on this case, is the fact that there was pre-planning, premeditation. Nobody is going to be able to escape the fact that there was a decision made to track that air tag in the vehicle, that there was a decision made to say, come to Utah and drive me home, and let's get the kids back there and let's try to resolve our marriage. There was a concerted effort by someone, and I don't know that it's been proven who yet, that placed a cover over that couch, trying to keep it from getting damaged in the course of this thing. There was a specific effort by someone to have a weapon ready for someone to walk through the door and then execute them. There was a solid plan that said, hey, he's at this location. I'm sending you an image on your phone. Get ready. Continue to watch Find My. All of those things just point to this incredibly tall conspiracy that really matches a few others, but still it is incredibly unique in and of itself.
Yeah, and that's why these cases, I mean, anytime someone loses their life, it's newsworthy because it's a tragedy. But I think this case in particular gets so much attention because you have so many moving parts that seem to come together. And it just always, in these family cases, to have like no one said, I don't think murder would be a good idea here. It was, we're all on the
Yeah.
same page. And that's always just something, whenever these cases happen, that just, it kind of blows my mind. Going back to the staging part of it, and we've talked about cases, and it seems like there's a lot where someone will tell police one thing, this is what happened. This seems like they went to some extreme lengths to try and cover up a crime ahead of time. But just in your experience from law enforcement, kind of putting it bluntly, how difficult is it to cover up a crime and trick police, knowing the training that you have compared to someone who thinks that they know how to cover up a crime?
I think with a lot of planning and preparation and experience at being bad, some people can get away with it. We know that there are crimes where people have gotten away with it because there's just not enough evidence to prosecute them and ensure a conviction. But here's the amazing thing about these kinds of things is through this fantasy process, these individuals came up with a plan that they were convinced was bulletproof. But when we look at these kinds of plans, they may walk into it very organized. They may have a perfect plan in place. But as soon as they start really acting out the homicide, when the victim is screaming for an ambulance, or they're writhing on the ground in pain, then something happens to that organized murder scene, and it starts to become disorganized, and that's where mistakes are made. And with the digital age that we're living in, holy cow, who would dare do anything? Because you might think you've turned off every tracking device in your phone, or you might think you've immobilized your vehicle so that the onboard computer isn't tracking information. But I guarantee there's going to be a piece of evidence somewhere, somehow, that comes up. And even if you're successful, like we're seeing now with genealogical DNA and how that's solving crimes and other kinds of things, there's going to be something that comes up in this technology world that we're living that is going to catch you, in my opinion. And when you got three people involved, that's a lot of voices that you got to keep quiet.
Right. A lot of stories. I mean, because I know in the interrogation part of it, we've seen everybody goes into a different room, and then you see how good
Exactly.
someone is at keeping their story together. I think the other part too, with cell phones and all of that, with the tracking is, and I've seen in affidavits where the fact that the cell phone was off, that in and of itself is kind of a red flag as well.
Exactly. It's almost more about what's not being said than what is said.
When you look at some of these cases and kind of bringing it back to the balance part of it and understanding kind of the world where it's in, and clearly Matthew lost his life. There's a lot of questions about this marriage. Um, domestic violence, we've seen a lot of cases, and I don't know the specifics of their marriage, but when you see some of these cases play out and the defense, and we've heard the defense often of, well, this was a toxic marriage, it was dangerous for her, we felt like we had to take matters in our own hands, almost saying like, you know, we were in this unsolvable situation and this was the only way out. And kind of looking at in Kathryn's case, maybe she, though she's pleading, she tries to make herself the victim. How far do those arguments typically go in court in cases like this?
Well, that's what this pre-sentence report that the judges has ordered before sentencing will be critical because it'll give us more of those questions that we don't know. I think it's really important to take into account if this is a woman who was battered and if she was worried that her children were being abused, if testimony comes out that the children were being abused, a whole bunch of things could be somewhat mitigating in what that length of sentence is and whether this person is rehabilitative. Uh, and I don't even know if I got that word right. That pre-sentence report is going to be really important. What's her life been like? What does she have a criminal history? And I haven't even been able to find out if she had a criminal history before that. But all of those factors are going to play in heavily in the judge's decision of what longevity in prison looks like. And we have to be a little bit compassionate, but that doesn't change the fact that she and allegedly her mother and brother chose to take a life. And with that, it continues to cause me, and I think everyone out here that's listening to us, to scratch our head of how can you commit murder, be sentenced to life in prison, and get out in 15 years?
Right. No, and we'll see. I mean, I know the sentencing guidelines, there was one charge on there that did have to life, but you wonder with the plea deal what the judge will go with. She'll be sentenced on September 9th. We'll see how it plays out. And of course, those two other cases involving the mom and the brother, what's going to happen there? They're scheduled for January 2026 to go on trial. Mike King, the host of Profiling Evil. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Chris.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.